Cynthia Chandler. I'm the Interim Associate Dean for Law Career Development. And this is the PIPS Day orientation. And I'm so glad that there's a really big crowd. We're recording it also because I know there's one towards classes having a review right now. And this really is, I would say, the career fair that attracts most of our first year students and also a good portion of our second year and third year students as well. PIPS Day, or Public Interest Public Sector Day, is a collaborative effort of every Northern California law school, along with One Justice, which is an organization that also helps us provide pro bono opportunities for our students. And as one of the many projects they do, they run PIPS Day in Northern California and a similar one in Southern California. And virtually every government and nonprofit employer interested in hiring Northern California law students for next summer and the following fall will be at this fair. It's a really easy, wonderful opportunity for employers. They get to do sort of one-stop interviewing. It's an easy opportunity for students. They get to do one-stop, interviewing and career fair viewing as well. And so I really encourage all of you, whether you're looking for a position in the summer or not, or summer, fall, depending if you're doing a summer thing on campus here or not, even if you just went to the career fair component, it gives you an incredible overview of the diversity of legal work that's happening in Northern California and the diversity of employers, both in the public sector and public interest sectors. So I wanted to give you an overview of what the day is about and also let you know what the timeline is before you get so entrenched in finals that you can't really take any more data in. Because the timelines start coming upon you quite quickly as the new year begins. So this seemed like the best time to give that kind of an overview. The green flyer that I was giving y'all gives an overview of all the deadlines associated with PIPS Day, and I'll go through these as we go through the presentation. Okay, so getting started. So December 10th, all of you will get an emailed invitation from One Justice inviting you to participate in PIPS Day. So our entire student body gets that email. That means everyone, every year, whether you're a day student, evening student, LLM, doesn't matter, everybody gets this invitation. The email will come from, let's see, what is it? We usually give us, yes. No? We usually have the email address on here. If we don't, I apologize. But you should be getting this, and so look out for an email that has somehow PIPS Day or One Justice in the address, and it will come in on Thursday, December 10th. At starting that point, it will also give you information about a student-specific website to get information on all of the employers that have registered to date. For now, you can use the website that I have listed on the slide of www.onejustice.org/PIPS, and that will give you a general overview. And later at that general website, there will also be a link to the student-specific site that will give you more detailed information, but that more detailed information along with directions of how to engage in PIPS Day will come in an email to you personally on December 10th. If you don't get it and you suddenly realize, oh no, I have not gotten an email, or I missed it, or I must have thrown it away, or I did something, feel free to contact me. I can get in touch with One Justice, make sure that you get it. We can make sure you didn't somehow fall through the cracks, and we'll make sure that there wasn't an error and or resend it to you so that you can get that information. Okay. Once you get that email, you can start looking at what employers have signed up, and then you can start actually applying for interviews and uploading materials if you want to do interviews. And again, those would be interviews for summer 2016 and fall 2016 positions primarily, although I suppose you could do spring 2017 if you want to be super precocious. So you can begin uploading materials by January 1st. And then the final cutoff deadline for uploading materials is noon on January 14th. There's absolutely no exceptions to that noon on January 14th deadline. to help folks prepare your applications. Law career development we're not like faculty in that we don't go away over the winter break, so you can always make phone or in-person one-on-one appointments to work with our staff on your materials. And then we'll also have a lot of drop-in hours leading up to that January 14th deadline. And the screen sheet has the list of drop-in hours that we'll have available, and we always have at least 1 or 2 career counselors available at any of those times for drop-in hours. If you're traveling, you can also do drop-in hours via telephone. So you can call Law Career Development's main telephone number and say, hey, is there someone available for drop-in hours? Can I do it by telephone? And that's fine too. We'll just have you email your materials to whoever you end up talking to, and we can review them with you over the phone and through the computer. And so we want to make this as accessible as possible for you to use our assistance in getting your materials into the best shape they can possibly be. Oh, and I should say, I don't know that it really matters when in that between January 1st to January 14th that you apply. Just try not to push it right up to the noon deadline on the 14th, because computers are known to fail. There's going to be a lot of people from a lot of schools all trying to upload their things at the exact same moment. But employers do not see it until after they are bundled, after that January 14th deadline. So the other thing is that, say you submitted something on January 1st, and then you came into a drop-in hour on January 5th, and you realized, oh wow, I had a couple of errors, I thought it was perfect, maybe it isn't, and you want to revise it. No employer will have seen it in that period of time. You can always revise things all the way up until that noon deadline. So if you found something that was wrong, it's not a problem. So the next question is, if you're going to do interviews, and again, you may decide you're not going to, and I'll talk about the career fair generally after talking about the interviews. You want to decide where or to whom you want to apply. And there's a number of criteria. We encourage you to take advantage of opportunities like the summers and different externships and things during the falls and springs to experiment with what you think you want to do in your legal career. And you might want to experiment, for example, around subject area. Perhaps you came to law school thinking you were just really interested in criminal law, and then you got into contracts class and you said, I can't believe it, but I actually think contracts is really cool. And maybe I don't want to be a criminal law attorney, and actually the more I hear and talk to people about the frantic pace of life as a criminal law attorney, maybe that actually isn't for me, and boy, now I'm not so sure. Well, this is a perfect time to experiment with a whole new subject area. And quite frankly, you can learn through the interviewing process. So I would say the process you go through to write a tailored cover letter, to truly envision yourself in an organization, contributing to an organization, really imagining it, can be really instrumental in helping you figure out if it's a right fit in and of itself. If you're not tailoring your cover letters, it's not much of an interesting exercise, and no one's probably going to pick you anyway, so I don't recommend it. But if you're really doing that process of tailoring your cover letters and really envisioning what it is about that organization that really is exciting for you, and what is making you want to really throw yourself into their work, that can help you figure out if it's the right fit. If you're having this visceral reaction to a cover letter and you just can't do it, perhaps you shouldn't be doing it, right? Or perhaps it just flows and you're like, this is an amazing fit. That process in and of itself can be really helpful. So I do encourage you to, like, even with just sitting down and looking at the list of employers, go through, if you're having trouble, some people are not, if you are, and many people are, having trouble deciding between a few different subject areas, give yourself this opportunity to actually envision what it might be like. Similarly, we want folks to experiment with perhaps the type of clients that you would want to work with, the type of skills you would want to develop. Say you really know exactly what you want to do. Well, hopefully you can start coming into law career development or talking to professors or attorneys and figuring out what skills would help you be the monster of that field, okay? This is your first chance to start developing some of those skills. You'd want to think about what order you might want to develop those skills in, where you might want to go first, for example. You might also think about types of employers. Perhaps, for example, you're really interested in government employment, but you've heard that some government employers really respect clerkships. Maybe you'll pursue a clerkship your first summer or fall, but then you'll switch over to government jobs. But you have to have that deliberate decision in your head of which kind of employer do you want to experiment with first. So for example, a person like that might decide to really apply to clerkships, but use PIPSA to check out government offices and go to the career fair and see what's going on for future reference. You also can use your summer to try a new location. Perhaps you can imagine yourself spending a summer somewhere, but not necessarily your whole life there. We do have some employers who come from out of state, and there are usually a couple of international opportunities at PIPSA as well. So that's something to experiment with. In terms of applying for interviews, and I'm going to do a whole training the week leading up to PIPS Day. So on Tuesday, January 26th, I'll do a training on how to do interviews, which is helpful for PIPS Day, but also generally helpful. So there'll be that interviewing panel on that Tuesday. And then on Thursday, January 28th, right before PIPS Day, I'll do a panel on how to work a job fair, which is both helpful, again, for PIPS Day, but broadly. So even if you decide you don't want to do PIPS Day, those trainings can be really helpful. But briefly, in terms of what kinds of materials you should apply with and how, so you want to make sure you really do get that first email on Thursday, December 10th, because it will have instructions for you on how to upload materials. It will also have a contact person for you to contact at One Justice if anything goes wrong or you're having trouble with the interface. And that's where you can get your tech support. You can also call Law Career Development and ask us for help if you lose that email or you can't figure it out. But again, you want to figure out those kinds of questions, ideally earlier, not at noon on the 14th of January. And then in terms of what materials, obviously certain employers are going to ask for specific things. I recommend that you submit a cover letter, whether it's asked for or not, unless you're told not to do it, because that's really the only way that people know who you are and can decipher what makes you different than another applicant, frankly. And then, so typical materials are a cover letter, a resume, possibly references. Not everyone asks for it, but some folks might. And then grades is the other thing that some folks will ask for, particularly government offices, but not all. For grades, when your grades are available, which they will be by then, what you do is actually, so it takes up a huge amount of space to scan a document and then attach it as a PDF. And if every law student in all these schools was all doing that, it would clog up the whole system that all these things are being downloaded with. So all the schools have agreed to a process collectively, and the employers have to agree to it also to participate in PIPS Day, whereby you're allowed to take what's called an unofficial grade sheet and fill it in and plug in your grades and then save that as a PDF. It's a Word document or Word template. Save it as a PDF and submit that. You can find those unofficial grade sheets in the resource library of LCD Online. So hopefully folks have established accounts with LCD Online. If you haven't, this is another incentive. And once you do that, if you go to resources, the resource library, and type in grade, the grade sheet will come up, and that's your Word template that you can use. We recommend that you apply early, meaning not the deadline. Again, it doesn't make a huge difference if you apply on the 1st of January versus like the 5th of January. We just don't want you to get snaggled with any kind of technical problems on the 14th. Interestingly, we also recommend that you consider applying directly outside of PIPS Day to any employer that you're really interested in. It shows enthusiasm. It shows that you're kind of like on top of the game. Some employers are so overwhelmed with the numbers of applicants they get through PIPS Day that they're really happy to get someone to apply outside of the day because it means it frees up a slot during the day and they will interview people ahead of time. And if they really love you as a candidate, you might get an offer before PIPS Day even takes place. So we recommend that you also apply directly before PIPS Day takes place, directly to the employers themselves.  'Cause. 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 in terms of how the interviews go, so say you submit this stuff by the 14th, then what happens? Then employers have a period of time to review the bundles that they get of applicants. And then they have to provide the people that they would like to make an offer of an interview to one justice. On Friday, January 22nd, students are notified of who has offered them interviews. You don't have to interview with everyone who offers you an interview. So for example, maybe you applied to 3 places you were really jazzed about and one that was kind of like a backup. You're like, maybe. And in that period of time, you're like, yeah, no, not so much. That's really not the right fit. We would say, just go ahead and tell the employer, no, you don't need that interview, reject that interview, give that slot to someone else. You don't need to hoard interview slots if you're really not interested in an employer, right? And you can reject an interview slot. And Tuesday, January 26th is the deadline to cancel or decline interviews. So you have until the 26th to say, yes, I'd like to interview, and then you can still cancel it as long as you do it by the 26th, or just decline the interviews. The sooner you decline, if you know you want to decline, again, it makes it easier for the system to fill in slots with other people who might be waitlisted for an employer. And help employers know what their schedule is like. I'd say one of the things that's important to know is that you cannot choose your interview schedule. So a machine computer, right, is going to be figuring out which of the interviews that were offered were then accepted, and then what people's schedules look like based on all the different employers that they want to see and how many hours the employers are available for that day. And it all comes together. And you really don't have any choice, which can be very frustrating. You might have 3 back-to-back. You might have 1 really early in the morning and then 2 at the end of the day. It's frustrating, but there really is no option to switch around your schedule. And the employer is really booked for the whole time. So I should say that the interviews run from 9 o'clock until 5:15, and the date is Saturday, January 30th. The fair always takes, or the career day always takes place at Hastings, which is fortunate for us because it's close by. It's not far away in downtown San Francisco. But so you don't have sole choice. And so once you've accepted an offer of an interview, and then you get your schedule, you can't just look at your schedule and say, oh, I don't like that, I'm going to just not show up to one of the interviews. That's considered extremely poor form. And employers, in the contract that employers sign to be part of the fair, they're required to tell the fair organizers of the schools the names of any students who failed to show up to interviews. And it's considered really poor form and somewhat unethical because you're taking an opportunity away from someone else, right? So if you have an interview and then you just don't show up, that takes an opportunity away from a peer in the law school community that we'd like to be able to go out to other folks. It also is disrespectful of employers, and we want employers to have a good experience at this fair so they come back year after year and continue to hire students. So it's considered really big faux pas to not show up for interviews. If you are in a terrible car accident or have a massive medical crisis or in a coma, obviously there might be some exceptions, right? But you would want to, if you're physically able to, you would want to immediately contact or send an email to both me at Law Career Development, Cynthia and Chandler, so it's cchandler@ggu.edu, and or contact the PIPS state organizers and let them know that a terrible emergency has happened and you have to cancel your interview. That allows them to try to fill in empty slots with other people who might want to interview with the employer. And then the interviews themselves are 25 minutes each, so they're not long. Employers have usually a 5-minute break between folks that they're interviewing. So they really try to keep it very much to that time, and one of the things I'll go over in the interviewing training is how to really budget appropriate amounts of time to get through an interview in 25 minutes, because that's really not very much time. And also you may really need the time too if you have it. Hastings spreads the interviews out over 2 buildings, that one is across the street from the other. if you have one appointment on the top floor, far end of one building, and you have to somehow get down across the street, up and around and upstairs and onto another floor, that can take you the full 5 minutes of like going as quickly as you can. So the timing is really important to be aware of. Okay. So every year, there's folks who are really excited about a particular employer and they don't get selected for an interview, and that's not the end of the world. So what I encourage people to do if they're not picked is a few things. One is that there is an open slot sign-up time. It begins at 8:30 or 8:15, sorry, the day of the fair. And the earlier, it's first come, first serve for open slots. The earlier you get there, the better chance you have of getting open slot interviews. People may find out that people have a crisis situation or something's happening, and slots may open up during the day as well, randomly. And so it's always a good idea if there's a particular employer you're interested in to check back in periodically to see if they have more open slots. We're looking at whether or not we might be able to have a sort of Twitter feed going out around open slots, and so that will be in the directions if that's possible. And that I think will be great, alerting people of employers who open slots. Because the numbers of students enrolled in law school in general has gone down, last year we saw open slots for employers that we were shocked. I think everyone who's been going to the fair for a long time was just completely floored that there were employers who historically have had enormous waiting lists, a huge demand, who suddenly had open slots. So these really top caliber employers have in fact open slots frequently, and it's really worthwhile to check in to see who has them. The same thing goes with, say something happens in your life before January 14th, and you really weren't planning on doing PIPSA at all, or for whatever reason you just can't pull it together to do it because things happen. Say the day of the fair, you're like, I really wish I had been able to do this. You could show up that day and still try to get an open slot with a particular employer or see who's available. I will say that that makes interviewing more challenging. You want to be able to make sure you have a little bit of time to research the employer. If you haven't already done so, on your phone, and make sure you actually really understand who that employer is before you walk into the interview that day. So it's a little more challenging, but it still can be helpful. Many of the employers who do interviews also have staff at the career fair itself. And every year people get hired from the career fair. So many people who don't get, or some people who don't get interviews will actually go to the table, right, and make a pitch for how enthusiastic they are about that employer and how they would really like to be considered for a summer or a fall position. And every year there are people who get interviews from going to the tables and get hired. I had the first, so I went to PIPSA for at least 15 years as an employer. And for some reason, I always got deathly ill the day before PIPSA, so I would be like so sick and have to interview person after person after person, being like, I'm just going to die, but whatever. So I have this awful association of PIPSA with being deathly ill. So hopefully that will not happen to anyone, including me, this year. But there were numerous times, at least 3, that are vividly, like I can remember vividly, where there were people who really didn't make the cut on their cover letters. And we did not extend an offer for an interview, and frankly would have been surprised if they wowed us, who then showed up at the table, completely wowed the people at the table, who then contacted us and were like, before you make any decisions, why don't you call this person and do a phone interview before you go home from PIPS day in the evening, interviewed the person over the phone, and we ended up extending offers to those people. So it really, that perseverance and enthusiasm can really shine through by contacting employers even if you haven't been picked. So I think the message of that is just don't be crushed if you don't get an interview that you wanted. Instead, try to figure out a way that you can still work it. And perhaps it won't work for that summer, but it might work for an externship later on. It might work for the following summer. And employers really do respect when folks show returned enthusiasm. And makes them wonder, maybe this really is the right fit that we didn't quite see from that first cover letter. Okay, so before I go on to TableTalk, are there any questions about the interviewing process at PIPS Day? So TableTalk is like a big career fair with the different organizations all have different booths with literature, with staff. Because there are enough both public interest and then public sector employers, Hastings divides them into two different table talk or networking areas. One is across the street from the other. So there's a public sector table talk and a public interest table talk. I can usually spot the employers from like a block away with which one's going to go where. The government folks are all in blue suits, almost always. And the public interest folks look like they're really uncomfortable wearing nicer clothes than they normally wear because they're trying to make the students feel more comfortable who are dressed up. And then you'll notice that they'll have sneakers on with a suit or something like that. I'm like, okay, those are the public interest employers. So there's frequently a different vibe to the rooms as well. You'll be able to, if you actually stand back and just watch it a little bit at some point, maybe after you talk to whoever you want to talk to or before, whatever, you can get a sense of how small the legal community is because you'll see that the employers are all like going across the rooms and hugging each other and waving and whatever. People will see old colleagues who have now gone on to a different organization. People will see people who used to be their interns who are now staff attorneys at some other agency. You get the real vibe of how it's a community and a real like legal family rather than just a random fair. So the employers are listed alphabetically, whether they're and then divided by whether or not they're government or public interest. And again, even if you decided not to interview, it's an incredibly interesting event, again, to see the breadth of legal work happening in Northern California, primarily it's from Northern California, and the different modes of practice. So you might see 3 or 4 different environmental groups who might be doing their work completely differently, focusing on different clientele or different tools, different strategies for affecting change. And you get to see that all in one roof, which is really kind of interesting. And so I encourage folks to go, again, whether or not you're really actively looking for a position for that specific summer or fall. You don't need to sign up for TableTalk. You can just show up, although I would encourage you, even if you're just showing up and you decided the interviewing thing wasn't for you, for whatever reason, if you just show up to do the TableTalk thing, I encourage you to register because if for no other reason, they take the registration information, which helps our law schools know how many of our students are interested in the fair, right? So that's just helpful for us. In exchange, we take all of the registrations, put it into a raffle system, and give out 4 fairly significant funding grants to random students for summer funding, summer or fall funding for wherever you want to work. And so it's pretty good odds that you don't usually get from most raffles that someone's going to get. And I can't remember how much they gave out, but I thought it was either $2,500 or $5,000. And they give out 5 of them, 4 or 5 of them. I think will be 5 this year. So anyway, if you register, so again, you don't have to sign up if you're going to TableTalk, but if you do, all you have to do is stop at the registration area on your way in, sign in, and your name goes into that raffle, which is, frankly, I think, a good thing. Plus you get a bunch of tchotchkes, and that's like fun. Swag. Okay. So, what to wear for PIPS Day. So it is a professional career fair where people will be interviewing. Suits are the standard attire, professional suits. Make sure you wear comfortable shoes. You will be walking a lot. And it doesn't look powerful and confident if you are wobbling around. I'll just say that. As someone who loves incredibly high heels, it doesn't look so good if you're walking like this at the end of the day. Okay. And also, frankly, you want to err on the side of being more conservative, especially if you're interviewing or planning to meet an array of employers. You want to think of the most conservative one and dress accordingly for that one, right? And when I talk about interviewing and the networking minutes, I'll talk more about what to wear. So what to bring. If you're just going to the career fair, You want to bring with you, ideally, some copies of your resume, possibly some references. You might want to bring a few copies of a writing sample as well. And you could bring one of those unofficial or a few of those unofficial grade sheets as well. But whichever employers, if you make a list, if you look at it ahead of time, you can also look at who's going to the fair as opposed to interviewing, and sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're different. Say you know that there's like 10 employers that are actually really kind of interesting to you. You should have at least 10 of your resumes then, right? And your other materials, because you might actually want to pass it out. You might not use all 10. You might, after you talk to folks, think it's not the greatest fit for you after all, or maybe there was such a long line you couldn't really get a good connection at all. But just on the cautious side, make sure you have enough for at least how many folks that you're really planning on talking to. And then I add in a few extras. You don't have to have a fancy portfolio to carry everything in, but you do need something that's going to make sure your materials aren't all schmutzy and funky by the time you get to them there. So make sure you have a folder, something to keep things not creased and squished and wrinkled. People do think about presentation of what your materials look like. What I would do with the career fair with staffing it, I actually used to have former interns who were still law students staff our tables, because I wanted folks who are prospective students to be able to go talk to them as references for our organization. And remember that part of this is about making sure it's the right fit for you, not just that it's the right fit for the employer. And if we had people we were really jazzed about, I wanted them to be able to talk to people who had gone through our training program and what valuable skills they had gotten out of it. So I was using students who are maybe second or third year students, or maybe a recent grad, to staff our tables. They were also all instructed that if there was someone who was interesting to them, to get their materials and take notes on the resume. So it would become like a handwritten note sheet for the folks at our table to track folks who were talking to them. So you want to make sure then by those kinds of, then the materials would come to me at the end of the day. If they looked all afright and a mess, that wouldn't be so great. So try to make sure that you have something to keep them looking pristine. In terms of how to present yourself, I mean, just generally you want to be enthusiastic and friendly. And if you find that you're really, really nervous, and some people get really nervous when they're in environments that are new to them, and it's just a new thing, not everyone's ever gone to like a tabling career fair, and can be intimidating and odd for some people. We have our staff from Law Career Development volunteering that day, and one of our staff from our school is almost always in one or both of the TableTalk rooms. And if you find me or whoever else, you can be like, can I do a mock approach with you? Like, I've actually gone outside with a student and been like, okay, pretend I'm at a table, let's do this, right? And like work through it. So remember that there's always staff there. So if you're feeling uncomfortable about how to present yourself and how to make that first approach, you can work through it with our staff of our team who will be there on site that day. And we can always sneak away, it's really fine. And then in terms of how to prepare, obviously when you're preparing for writing cover letters for the actual interview slots, if you're doing that, you want to really research the employers, try to find out what kinds of work they do, have they been in the news recently, look at their websites for sure, who's their own staff leadership, and really try to get a sense of who they are. You might want to go through our alumni directory, find out if we have alums working there. You could even ahead of time schedule an informational interview with someone who's working there, for example. You'll also have lists of the employers who will be at TableTalk, and you can similarly prepare that way for those if you want to. There also, though, might be employers that you're just kind of, generally perusing. You really don't quite understand what they're doing. I would say no matter who you approach, even if you're not terribly prepared, you want to be very respectful of them and recognize that particularly in the public interest and public sector, the public interest sector and the public sector world, people are very impassioned about what they do. They tend to personalize their jobs. They tend to have their identities wrapped up in their jobs. So if you, for some reason, were not terribly prepared for something, but ended up there was an open slot and you're in line, and in the 2 minutes, by the time you're at the front of the line, you checked out this employer for 2 minutes, you're like, maybe this is interesting, I'm just going to give it a whirl and try out this interview. Or maybe you're walking around and you're like, people keep going over there, I'm going to check it out. I didn't really think about that. Whatever you do, you don't want your inquisitiveness to come off as being insulting. Okay, so you want to be careful about the language that you use when you really don't know what people do, and try not to say things like, why do you do this? What do you do? Because like that kind of tone can sound almost accusatory, and what you really probably mean is, oh, this sounds really interesting. I see that you're talking with a lot of people. I don't know much about your organization. I would love to know more. That's like a more genuine way of opening up thoughtful dialogue. So that's just something to think about. How you approach folks when things are new to you. Okay, so let's imagine that you actually get an offer. So the other thing about PIPSA is interviews happen, and then once the day is over, you should usually, if you're doing interviews, you will want to ask what their timeline is for hiring. And let's say they're not even doing interviews, they're just at the TableTalk fair. You could ask them what their timeline is and can you formally apply, and then you know what their timeline is, and then you go through that timeline and you get an offer. It's really important to respect the rules and timelines of offers and acceptance of offers. So most employers will give some conditions on their offer. So you might have a period of time to respond within. And then the offer expires at the end of that time. That's the most common condition. Employers who are participating in PIPSA are required to give reasonable time for deliberation. Because what started happening over the years is that some employers started giving less and less and less time to make decisions, to try to push their top candidates to make a quick decision before deliberating other options. And so many employers started giving people 24 hours or 12 hours to deliberate within. And then we started with these rules. And now I would say most employers will give you a week. Many employers will not give you more than a week. But there's usually a clear condition. You need to respond within the time period that employers give you. So that's basically they're telling you that's our rule. We need to hear from you within a week. Even if you don't want the offer, and you don't want to accept the offer, you should respond in that time period, because if you don't, it makes the employer think that either A, you don't know how to communicate directly, it leaves them confused and worried about, did you hear this or not, or whatever. I mean, it just like opens questions. And it certainly doesn't lead to your working with them again down the road. So say you're deciding between, I don't know, 2 prosecutors' offices, and they both give you an offer and you're debating between these 2. If you just let one go and you never respond to it, you should probably assume you shouldn't be going back there again. Because now there's some sort of note in your file with them, employment file with them, that you don't respond to offers. You just look unprofessional. So you want to make sure that you respond. The other thing is just around not hoarding offers of interviews. Try not to hoard offers in general. There's other people who would love to be able to consider an opportunity, and if you don't want that opportunity, let the employer know, and let them move on to another candidate and give someone else a crack at that job. That's just a respectful way to treat your peers. And we can help you at Law Career Development on very short notice. Like if you just called up and said, help, I want to nicely back out of something and like reject an offer, but I want to leave the possibility of working with someone again open in the future. How do I do that? We can help you with the wording of how to do that based on what your hopes and dreams are with that future employer. And you always want to be nice and frankly and polite in how you reject an offer in general. And certainly you should not think that you can just decide to take an extra day and accept an offer, that that offer will still be there, right? More than what they've given you. So in addition to sort of how employers expect to be treated, and they expect their rules and timelines to be kept, there are some really strong student conduct rules around how to act around offers and acceptances that most Northern California schools have all agreed to. And these are conduct issues that if you fail to comply with these rules, there will actually be notes put into your formal moral character review file here at Golden Gate Law School. So something we take very seriously. One, again, is like not showing up to interviews. If you just choose not to show up because you're not taking it seriously, we take that very seriously as a lack of professionalism, and we actually make note of that. The other one is reneging on acceptances of offers. So say you're at PIPS Day, you're interviewing for an employer that you're excited about, you're also excited about a couple of other folks, or you're excited about someone who's interviewing, who you're hoping to interview with, who isn't even interviewing through PIPS Day. There's some other group, they're not part of PIPS Day. So you're kind of excited because you have a few things out there in the world, you've got some options percolating. And this particular employer really likes you a lot, and right there on the spot, they say, I'm just so excited about you, I'd love to make an offer for you for this summer. Please come join us. And you say, oh my gosh, I'm so flattered, of course I'd love to. And then you think inside your head, oh shit, what did I just do? Excuse my language. But really, I didn't even think about all these other offers I have out there in the world. Well, if you've accepted that offer, you're now locked in. That's our moral conduct standard. If you accept an offer, you're locked into that offer. The reason that we do that is we feel that you're law students and that it's important for you to understand how contracts work. It actually reflects on your lawyering capacity if you're going around breaking contracts because you're law students, right? So that's one reason. The other thing is that, again, there's probably nothing that upsets employers more than they're taking real time and deliberate thought and attention to creating a diverse cohort who has all the skills and the right kind of diversity and whatever that they're looking for, and then someone at the very last minute pulls out and leaves a hole in what their capacity is that they really might not be able to fill with someone else who meets their needs, which then influences how well they're able to serve their clients. So it really, and again, folks in these sectors are really passion-driven, they're mission-driven with their work, and nothing irks them more about you're messing up their work capacity. So people hold grudges around that. Like employers will remember people who renege on offers for years. I'm very serious. Don't be the law student who reneges on an offer. And so we take it really seriously as part of an incentive to make sure that employers are treated in a way that they feel they should be. And because, again, you're law students, you should be taking contracts seriously. So if you're given an offer, what you should do, knee-jerk response, is say, oh, I'm so flattered, that's so exciting. How much time do I have to give you my answer? Right? So you showed enthusiasm, but you haven't locked yourself in. Then you can go run and call locker development first work day during business hours and say, what do I do? What do I do? How do I? And maybe you'll need help negotiating an extension. Maybe you need 2 more weeks to know what some other employer on the other side of the country is thinking. We can help you with how to negotiate that. We can help you with that kind of language. So that you don't get in a spot where you're reneging on the offer, so you don't want to be there. Okay. Any questions on that stuff so far? Yeah.
So let's say that you do accept the first offer and you still have 2 interviews in the day.
Yeah.
Should you inform those subsequent appointments, I can't do this because I've already made a commitment, or?
Yeah, I would say you could do one of a couple things. One is you might want to have those interviews if you're thinking about doing a later opportunity with that employer. So say, I'm going to totally make this up, say you are really, really, really excited about being a public defender. This is like your lifelong dream. And you have heard that County A does a great job at training people in the first summer. You've asked around and everybody loves that. But you've heard that County B pays people the most post-graduation. And they will only hire people, County B will only hire people post-graduation who do a 2nd year summer with them. They will never, ever, ever hire someone who doesn't do a 2nd year summer with them. And you have interviews for the first summer with both, because you don't know if it's going to go right with the training people or not, or blah, blah, blah. Say you're going through, you get an offer with immediately, right on the spot, which is very rare for a public defender's office, I just want to say that, extremely rare. You get an offer right in the spot with number 1, and you know that they do great training, and that was your goal. You might still go to that interview with office number 2 and say, you know what, I want to be extremely forthright with you. I accepted an offer with this county only because I heard this special thing about their summer program for their first year summers. But what I've heard about your county is that long-term, your county does the best training, the best support, and has the best win rate, and that is the county I want to work at. I want to be part of a winning team. I want to be part of this for the long term. I realized that I might be better coming to work with you if I did this other summer first. So I accepted it, but I still want to be part of your team. Could I think about an externship over the fall or the spring with you? Could I think about reapplying next summer? Can I learn more about the office? Because that's really where I want to be. Do you see what I mean? So you could play it that way. You'd want to give a reason for how come you've picked one group over the other that isn't insulting, that you're still hoping for that opportunity with the second group. But you can still do it that way. Or if you're like, yeah, no, I took this one and I don't want anything to do with the other groups, like it doesn't make sense, it's not going to be the right fit, I don't want those interviews, then you should go to the registration group right away and tell them that you got an offer, you accepted an offer. They will then immediately put your slots up as empty slots into that empty slot process. And then if the Twitter thing is up, they'll send a tweet out to get people to fill those spaces. And then it saves it for people. The only thing you don't want to do is not communicate and just not show up. Yeah. Any other questions?
What's the setting like for the formal interviews? Is it like individual rooms or one room with a bunch of people interviewing at the same time?
So they use the whole Hastings campus for these things, and so you might have a cubicle in a library that you're interviewing in, and there's other, they wouldn't have right next door, but maybe a few cubicles away there would be some other people interviewing. You might be in a classroom, like I've been in a classroom like this where like I was interviewing someone in one corner and there was another employer at the other end interviewing someone, but there seemed like there was enough space and distance that I really wasn't aware of the other person's conversations. It didn't seem funky and like it still felt private. And then they also take over the staff's offices. You could be in some random professor's office, but they sort of use the whole space of the whole campus. Yeah, and Hastings is very confusing to navigate, so one of the things we're doing is going to do a better job with maps because people get very lost. Yeah, Mr. Becker? Or no? Okay. Okay, so the last thing I just want to cover is briefly funding of public interest or public sector summer. One resource I really want to encourage you all to look at is psjd.org. psjd.org is sort of the national database of nonprofits, and they have also the best database for summer funding for doing public interest or public sector work. And every year there are groups that are trying to give away money for people to work with a specific demographic, for people of a specific demographic doing public interest work, you name it, or people doing work in a certain geographic area, where the deadlines just keep getting extended and extended and extended because no one is applying for their money. And that's the place to find that kind of money. And the typical grants for their summer funding are somewhere between, I'd say, $1,000 to $5,000, but you can apply for multiple ones and stack it up. So Golden Gate University's, our law school has a public interest Facebook page, which is the Facebook address that I put down on the slide. And if I hear about any kinds of public interest-oriented summer funding opportunities, I always post it there. So I would encourage you to like that page and check out the postings there. Equal Justice Works is an organization that has a website. You can Google Equal Justice Works. I should put the website on the slide. I apologize. They have information both on sometimes summer funding, definitely postgraduate funding for people who are third years, but also generally, they have monthly webinars that are free on how to finance your law school career and try to figure out how to do public interest afterwards, like how you make that work, how you can try to maximize different kinds of loan repayment programs you can qualify for, and how you can structure your loans to help you. So that's something that, again, those webinars are monthly and they're free, and I would encourage you to look at those if you're thinking about a career in the public interest sector or public sector. And I recognize that many people going to PIPSA are not, but if you are, that's a really great resource. And then the last resource we have is on campus, which is the Public Interest Law Foundation. And we have a rep here.
Thank you, sorry. I'm Clarissa. I know most of the majority of the people here. Thank you guys for showing up. I want to confirm your story about you being sick for PIPS Day. Actually, you were sick, which is pretty funny. So Public Interest Law Foundation's goal is to help facilitate funding, for example, to help students, GDU students, who decide to do public sector or public interest work. I also did PIPS Day, and my first one summer internship was with the General Assistance Advocacy Project, so I could plug them. So they would be there as well. I think it's a wonderful opportunity. And then in terms of the summer funding for summer work for the summer of 2016 and fall of 2016?
Yeah.
Yes, thanks. And there is the Justice and Equity Grant that's granted to a variety of students at the end of the spring of this year, and the goal behind that is to help subsidize students' living expenses for the time that they are working for free. Unfortunately, that is the nature of public service work. But while you're doing good work, PIL's goal is to fund, obviously, students who apply. There are a couple of grant requirements that are typically not set yet, just because we do a lot of fundraisers throughout the semester, throughout the year, and there's no way to total that amount until a little bit closer to the end of the spring semester. For example, attending PIL events or PIL fundraisers, is one way you can fulfill one of the grant requirements. Actually being in this very room right now is a way to satisfy one of the grant requirements. Applications are not yet prepared. I would grab everybody's emails off of the list that you just signed in here, so that way we can keep track of who attended and as well as communicate the grant requirements should we choose to apply. Typically it's really standard stuff like, again, attending PIL events, helping coordinate some things. At the end of the year, we have in the past held an annual gala where it's an auction of a variety of items that spans a gamut of things, from massages, our spa retreats, wine tasting, etc. That sort of stuff is not necessarily pinned down as yet, just because in the past, historically, it's just been a little bit it's cost prohibitive, I guess, in some years to go ahead and hold the annual gala, so there's still some talks around how we're going to help facilitate that, but nonetheless, we will be giving a grant, hopefully 3 of at least $500 each for the summer. That is the goal, and we're almost there, picking up a check today, so I hope that you guys all applied. If you do have any questions, if you don't mind, if you have any questions, if you're more than welcome to email PIL. Can you see that? Or if you see me in the halls, I can give you my email as well. Sorry, I'm not right on the board. And you're more than welcome to email me with any questions that you have about the grant requirements and how to go about the process of applying for a second grant. Thank you guys for your time. That's all I'm going to have.
Well, so please do make sure that you sign up in the sign-up sheet there. Yeah, and then are there any other questions about PIPSA summer funding? Yep.
So even if an employer doesn't necessarily say they want you to bring like an unofficial transcript of your grades, is that something that you just hand out regardless?
So it's interesting. I suppose it also depends on what your grades are.
Well, yeah, I mean, assuming you do well.
Okay, if you don't do spectacularly well, why show that off, right? If no one's asking for it. Many public interest offices will never want grades. They don't want. Many public interest organizations feel that grades are not actually an appropriate litmus test for determining whether or not you'll succeed in their environments. And so there are a few, I would say more like the larger institutional, historic nonprofits that still ask for grades. And then most government offices, though, do ask for grades. So certainly if it's asked for, you need to provide it. If it's not asked for, if you're in the top 10% of your class, it can't hurt. But again, my hesitancy with this audience is, I would say if it's a government office, sure, go ahead. If it's a public interest office, that may actually show that you're not the right fit. Right. Because on a political basis, many of the public interest organizations have affirmatively decided that grades are reflective of systems of oppression that they don't want to buy into. And so the process of handing out your grades might actually show you're not a good fit if they haven't asked for it. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So in most other environments, that's not necessarily the case, but PIPSA, be a little more cautious about that for the public interest ones, not the public sector.
Okay, so for the government ones.
Government ones, grades are usually fine to hand out. I'm gonna
If they don't
go,
ask for them.
if they don't, you could have them, you could say, like say you're going to the table talk, and so you don't have the criteria in front of you, right? You could say, would you like, I have my grade sheet, would you like that too? And they'll let you know, yes or no. They go, yeah, no, save it, or yeah, please, you know, they'll take it. And then honestly, I just want to say I didn't talk about cover letters for the career fair. If there are particular organizations that you're really jazzed about, especially if they were not interviewing there at all, and you haven't even had a chance to show off a cover letter yet at all, it's really appropriate to fine-tune a cover letter to give them at the career fair. I mean, you can do that, absolutely. If there are folks that you really hadn't heard much about, and then you get there, and then you're just completely excited about them once you hear more about what they do. Say you're with a friend, the friend drags you over to this place, to this booth to talk, and then they start talking, and suddenly you're like, oh, I never even thought about this before, it's so exciting, this was not something, and then you start talking too, and you're getting really into it. It's totally fine to hand over a resume without a cover letter, right? I mean, it's better to have, I would say, in that instance, no cover letter than some strange, weird thing that makes you not seem like you're the right fit. And to talk to the human being instead. Again, I do think also using TableTalk as a way to basically do a reference check on the employer is reasonable. If you go to TableTalk and you don't like the person you talk to, and that's who they've chosen to be their representative, and you think they're a real jerk and the way they're treating students is awful, that's something for you to consider about whether or not that's a place you really want to work too. So I think, you know, TableTalk is for you to figure out if it's a good fit for you, not just the employer again. Yeah?
If you are interested in the organization, but you don't particularly like the person, you still want to do the interview though, right?
Yeah, I think you want to do the interview if you also don't like the interviewer, and there's something that's really not jiving, and you might wonder if there's actually a cultural thing about that organization where it's a bad fit. And chances are, if you've had that bad of experience with two people, they may not like you either. I'm just saying. There are organizations where, you know, it's like, I don't know, oil and water, it's not quite right. You know? Yeah?
I just wanted to add, actually, on that same note, one of my interviewers, I'm certain, was falling asleep while we were interviewing. And for a very long time, I thought, oh my God, I bored him to death, that he totally, you know, just wasn't paying attention to me. Turns out it worked out well. I wound up getting the job, and he's a really, really nice guy. And he is the executive director / my supervising attorney. So don't necessarily, that wouldn't make or break that experience against the other candidates.
Okay.
But apparently he was having a really bad day.
It was at the end. I was at 5, and I had like a 4 or 3-hour gap between my interviews. But like, don't let that discourage you.
Okay.
Yeah. I guess I'm talking about, like, sometimes you can just tell it's truly the wrong fit.
Yeah.
The language people are using, the way that they're talking to people, it just really rubs you the wrong way. Which is sort of different than someone deeply exhausted at the end of the day after interviewing 12 people in a row. Yeah.
Okay.
But for sure. I mean, again, sometimes, another thing, please, if by chance you are interested in both prosecution and defense, criminal defense positions in the same counties, please come to my training and working and networking fair. Because they're listed alphabetically, public defenders and prosecutors' offices are frequently right next to each other. And so they will see that you are talking to both tables. And that is a really delicate, interesting thing to handle, and that's something that we'll talk about in more detail at that training. Okay? So I think that's it. I wish you lots of luck and have a wonderful holiday if I don't see you. You know,
Yeah?
Yeah.
See you later. Congratulations. That's fantastic. And honestly, well, that's what you want to do. 100% negative. Yeah. So fast.
What's that? Would you like Mariana that?
I'll definitely let you know.
Look, I mean,